We are grateful to have an incredible lineup of speakers today who will expand on why it is so important that these demands are met today. And we want to ask that everyone who is with us here today or even virtually to call Nancy Pelosi at her office. The phone number is 415-556-4862 and demand that she sign the letter. And also on social media, you can tag her on Twitter at Speaker Pelosi. We have to put the pressure on our representatives. We are also asking that if you are in another place, that you organize actions that will target your local congresspeople if they have not signed on to the letter as well. Our next speaker is Gloria Romero with the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
We are here today to demand that Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, sign the letter that 114 of her colleagues have signed, calling for a pulling back on so many harmful, genocidal measures of the U.S. blockade. This blockade, which will be 62 years in February, that was signed by President Kennedy. This blockade, which was typed by 243 measures under the Trump administration, but which has been continued, every one of those measures, by President Joe Biden, who has added even more sanctions, shows that the U.S. government has never ceased in its campaign and war against Cuba, simply because Cuba takes care of its people, simply because Cuba has free, universal, and accessible education and health care, that Cuba gives refuge to people who are seeking asylum for being politically persecuted in the world. And today, Nancy Pelosi, who was supposed to be the leader of the Democratic Party and the Speaker of the House, has been silent.
Our next speaker is Richard Becker with the Western Regional Coordinator of the Answer Coalition.
Thank you very much. And it's really important that we're out here today. And really, what we're marking is the 63rd anniversary of the Cuban Revolution. If you had asked the leaders in the United States in 1957 or 58, what was maybe the last country that they thought would have a revolution and break away from U.S. imperialism? And I think Cuba would have been right up there, because Cuba was so dominated by the United States. Its electrical company, its the plantations, the casinos, all the obscenities that were inflicted on the Cuban people as part of the U.S. empire. But the Cuban people shocked the world by overthrowing the Batista regime and going on to resist U.S. imperialism and to become a beacon for those all over the world who are fighting for liberation and against oppression of all different kinds. Yeah. There is no country in the world today that has that kind of a reputation. There really isn't. If we're standing up, there are many countries that have stood up. But when you go to any international gathering, it's Cuba that gets the greatest attention and the greatest solidarity and the greatest admiration from people all over the world. And that's its great sin. That's what U.S. imperialism hates more than anything else. It's like when slaves escaped or rebelled, they had to be crushed. The U.S. has been trying to crush Cuba now since the time of the revolution. And it is continuing. And the people of the United States, us, we have to stand up in solidarity with Cuba, demand an end to the blockade, an end to this hypocritical talk about human rights from people like Nancy Pelosi, when really their actions are the greatest denier of human rights of any government anywhere in the world. So we're here today to say, end the blockade, let Cuba live. End the blockade, let Cuba live.
Cuba is not our enemy. Our enemy is U.S. imperialism. Our next speaker is Nick Pardee, the co-coordinator of the Cuba-Venezuela Solidarity Committee.
So again, we're here today outside the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi, demanding the normalization of U.S. Cuba relations, which ultimately must mean the end of the 60-year-long criminal U.S. blockade of Cuba that has failed for 60 years to crush Cuba's socialist example as intended. And the U.S. as well is trying to crush the revolutionary governments of Venezuela and Nicaragua, and of course we oppose that too. So the December 14th letter that 114 members of Congress signed onto is a positive step forward towards lifting the most crushing sanctions that were unilaterally and illegally imposed on Cuba by the U.S., with President Biden not only embracing the cruelty of Trump's hundreds of new sanctions, many of which were imposed during the pandemic, but against the wishes of the majority of the people in the U.S., Biden has escalated the economic and covert warfare that aims to make the Cuban people suffer. In 2021, for the 29th consecutive year, nearly every member country of the United Nations voted to end the U.S. blockade of Cuba, with the U.S. and apartheid Israel standing alone on the wrong side of history. Now it's 2022, 2 years into the global pandemic, with the Democratic Party having held the majority in Congress and Biden having been in the White House for the past year. And so far, the message of this administration to the people of both the U.S. and Cuba has been, you're on your own. They have the power to end the blockade and provide the essentials of life to people here today if they really wanted to. It has been Cuba and its revolutionary project, while under siege by U.S. imperialism, that have set the example for the world of international solidarity and meeting people's needs. With its renowned national healthcare system that has been able to send brigades of doctors to treat COVID patients in dozens of other countries, and its biotechnology sector, which has domestically produced vaccines which have already been received by nearly the entire population and are being shared with other countries in need. So, Nancy Pelosi is a millionaire politician of the ruling class of the United States, the capitalist class. She owns several properties here in San Francisco and collects millions of dollars from them. Not because she does any actual work, but because people like us do the work that produces the wealth that she sits back and collects. It's in Nancy Pelosi's best interest that the people of the United States don't realize that there's an example of a different system that prioritizes people's needs right next door in Cuba. Nancy Pelosi is an open defender of capitalism, while half of the people in this country live in or near poverty. So, while we continue to build a movement here inside the United States to end U.S. imperialism and end the dictatorship of the rich, it's capitalist elites like Nancy Pelosi who stand in our way. So, we're not asking Nancy Pelosi, we're demanding of Nancy Pelosi. Sign your colleagues' letter on Cuba and bring its recommendations to a vote in Congress. End the criminal U.S. blockade of Cuba and let Cuba live.
Yeah.
Let Cuba live.